Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moykins from Big Mountain Studio. If you're interested in iOS development, consider subscribing and clicking that bell icon down below so you can get notified when I come out with new videos on iOS development. Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about 3 different ways that you can navigate from one screen to another. And this is what we want. Let's talk about our app before we actually get into it. So on the left-hand side, we have a table view with cells, and it shows trips. And the idea is when a user taps on one of these cells, they go to another screen and they see all of the trip activities that they plan or create. They'll be able to add days, and then under those days, they can add their activities. So that's what we're looking for. But right now, we just want navigation from that table view cell to another view controller. So in this video, I'm going to show you 3 different ways on how you can do that. Okay, the first one is we're going to talk about the segue control. This is especially easy to implement if you're using storyboards. By the way, the simple definition for the word segue is a transition that takes you from one thing to another. In our case, it's taken us from one view controller to another view controller. Now I'm starting with segues and how to use them with storyboards, but we're also going to talk about other ways where you don't necessarily need storyboards to navigate. Okay, let's get into the project now and set up a segue and see the different steps involved in using this method. And of course, before we do that, we have our tasks that we have to manage. And it seems like I haven't updated in a long time because we have create an app icon, which I did a few videos ago. so now we're going to handle the navigation from the trip itinerary screen. And I talk a little bit about customizing it here because in a future video, I'm going to show you a really cool transition where we can click the cell and maybe the cell goes up and it expands. And then we show the trip's itinerary and then we show the trip's activities from there. But that's in a future video. Okay, we are in Xcode, and this is a new screen that I created. And it's not actually going to be the screen that we're going to use. It's basically sort of like a placeholder because I want to show you guys about navigation first before we actually get into building out this screen. So this is kind of like a placeholder for our trip activities. And as you can see, there's just a button on here to go back. If I click on the scene itself and we come over to our properties, you can see what I did is in the file inspector here. Down below, I set the global tint. So all that does is when you set the tint at this level, it basically means that any control that you add after this is going to use that tint. So for example, if I pull up the object library and maybe I add a segmented control. Wow, well, it's taking a long time to add that control, huh? It's taken a really long time to add that control. It's almost there. It's almost there, guys. Okay. We did it. Looks like there was an error. You can see up here, an internal error occurred. Editing functionality may be limited. Okay, we can report the bug. I'll do that later. Okay, but as you can see, it assumed the tint color that we set in the global tint. Now this global tint, it doesn't apply to all storyboards. It applies to just this storyboard. So every time I create a new storyboard file, I'll have to set the global tint. Okay, enough about that. Let's go to the main view controller here that has our trips on it. So this is where we're going to navigate from. And what we want to do is when we click on this cell, we want to navigate to the new view controller so we can see, that trip's activities. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a storyboard reference to reference this scene on this storyboard. If I just start typing in reference, there's only one there, storyboard reference. So let's drop that on there, and then we'll select it, and let's go to the properties. And which storyboard is it? It is the activities view controller. So it's this one right here. Now, you know that storyboards can have multiple view controllers on them, right? They can have multiple scenes in one storyboard. But I don't have to specify which scene or which view controller I want to reference because I only have one. And so you can see here it says initial view controller. And that's basically what I'm going to do. If I have more than one view controller on the storyboard, what I could do, so let's come back here. We'll select the scene. And then if we come to the properties here, you see right here, there's a storyboard ID. I could give this a storyboard ID, and then I can use that storyboard ID in my reference right here. So I could specify a storyboard ID if I wanted to, but we're not. We don't need it. Okay, so let's see here. What I want to do is create a segue, and the easiest way to do that is first I have to find what it is I'm going to be tapping on or interacting with to create this segue. So I'm going to be tapping on this cell. So what I want to do is right click and drag from the cell and create a link to our storyboard reference. And I'm just going to show. It's going to be a plain show segue. So when I tap on that, it goes to the screen. So let's run it right now and see how it looks. Okay, so the app starts. I'm just going to close this screen here. And we can click on a cell. And as you can see, it opens up to the trip activities. And that's because of the segue that we set up. Now at this point, we don't have any way to get back. This button doesn't do anything right now. So let's handle that. And we're going to use segues for that too. Now, you might think that in order to get back, you could just right click here and drag back to this ViewController somehow. That'd be really cool if you could do that with a segue. But that's not really how it's done to go backwards. What we need is what's called an unwind segue. In order to get the unwind segue to work, what we have to do is we have to create an action outlet in this ViewController that we want to go back to, which is this one right here. So in this trips ViewController, let's go into the code. And I need to set up an action outlet to handle the unwind. Okay, now in order to create an unwind outlet, so just start typing unwind. Now, you notice there's a couple of different options here, right? You have that unwind, you have that function that is highlighted right now. But what you want is the one that is right underneath that. So as you can see in that description there, that's really small. It says add an IB action method for an unwind segue. And that's exactly what we want. You want the interface builder action. So let's add that. And you can see, now I thought this was a mistake at first, but it's highlighting just the name part. So you can call it whatever you want. And what I'm going to do is I want to call this Unwind to Trips ViewController. There we go. And we have some example code here, but we actually don't even need that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this because we don't actually need any of this code. I mean, you could use it, but in order to unwind, we can just leave this blank. Okay, good. So this is the important part. You want the IB action there. Now we go back to the activities ViewController, and you may notice that there is an exit on this scene dock. This top bar right here is called the scene dock. So there's an exit there, and it's basically represented with this item right here in the view hierarchy. So what we want to do is we want to grab that back button and we want to drag it up and connect it to the exit, or you can drag it and connect it to this exit over here. And what happens is it comes up with your IB actions that handle the unwinds. So unwind to trips ViewController, and that's the name I gave it, right? Trips ViewController. So that's what we want. We're just going to unwind to that. And now you can see there's an unwind segue there. So now if we run it, we should be able to click on a trip, and then we can click this back button and it goes back. So there you go. There's your unwind segue in action. Okay, so let's look at the summary here. Segues are used with storyboards. You right click and you drag them to make the connections, between two different storyboards, or from a button to a storyboard, or in our case, a TableView cell to a storyboard reference. And in order to get back, you use an unwind segue, and you create an unwind segue by creating an action outlet to where you're going back to. So we did that. We created an unwind segue going back to the trips ViewController. And then we just right clicked on a button and we dragged it to the exit that's either in the scene dock or in the view hierarchy over on the left-hand side there. Okay, so let's look at the second thing. ViewControllers have functions that are built into them, and they allow you to navigate forwards and backwards. Specifically, they have two functions called present and dismiss. So let's take a look and see how this works. We're going to go back into our project and we're going to undo everything we did with the segues. And then we're going to see if we can achieve the same thing using the ViewController's built-in functions. Okay, now I want to undo all my work. So the easiest way to do that is just to come to source control and discard all changes. And you may have seen before, I didn't have any pending changes that I had to commit or anything. And I did that on purpose. I want to make sure that I had no pending changes so I could undo everything I did. Okay, so like I said before, ViewControllers have their own functions built in for navigation. So if we look at the trips ViewController, we're not going to create a button or anything. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to look at when someone clicks on the cell. So we're going to add a TableView function to our code So let's go into our trip view controller. And let's create some more room here. And I believe down here, I usually separate all the TableView functions into a separate extension here. So we'll go to the bottom of this. And the TableView function that I'm looking for, I'm just going to start typing in TableView. It's did select, it's actually this first one right here, did select row at. So let's double click that, hit delete. Now, first of all, if I want to navigate, I'm just going to use this view controller's function. Like I said, all view controllers have built-in function to navigate. Okay, so I'm just going to start typing in self.present, and we see the function right here. This is what we want. Present a view controller. So you can see the parameters here. You know, the first parameter is, well, which view controller do you want to present? And I don't have a reference yet to our activities view controller that I want to present. So I'm going to have to get that first. So let's come up here. And in order to get that view controller, that reference, we're talking about this one right here, the first thing I'll need to do is get a reference to its storyboard. Okay, and you can see right here, there's a function here where all I need is the name of the storyboard and identify which bundle it's in. So the name of our storyboard is Activities View Controller. And the bundle, well, the bundle is this Itinerary app that I have. But I'm just going to specify nil, because if you specify nil, it's just going to use the same project that you're in. So let me show you guys something here. I want to make sure you have a clear concept of what bundle actually means. So a bundle, the English definition is a collection of things that are all wrapped together or put together. So Apple uses the word bundles to represent apps, frameworks, plugins, etc. And it provides a single interface for locating items such as storyboards, assets, images. So really, you can have a project or what's called a workspace that has a bunch of different pieces put together to build your app. And all those different pieces or frameworks are called bundles. And if you're in your main project and you want to grab a resource or something from another project or another bundle, then you can use that bundle keyword to access those things. Okay, so back in our project, we now have a reference to our storyboard. And then using that storyboard, we can get our view controller. So I'll just say view controller, VC for view controller. And then I'm going to use the storyboard to get the initial view controller. Okay, and it's this function right here. So instantiate initial view controller. And that's exactly what I want. So how do we know what's the initial view controller? What does that mean? Does that mean if you only have one, it's the initial view controller? Not exactly. So let's go back into this view controller here, or the storyboard rather. Wow, it's taking a really long time to open up that storyboard. Oh man. Okay, there we go again. It looks like Xcode does not like this storyboard for some reason. All right, let's get rid of that. Okay, so we're back in this storyboard. And how do we know which is the initial view controller? Well, it's this arrow right here. And that's what's important. If that arrow is not there, then that function will not work. So if we select this, it's basically controlled with this property right here, is initial view controller. If I uncheck it, that arrow goes away. If I check it, the arrow comes back. So this specifies my initial view controller. So when we look at this code back here, and it says instantiate initial view controller, it's going to take the one with it, that arrow. Okay, good. So now we can specify which view controller it is. And animated, yeah, sure. Let's say true. And completion, we don't have any code we need to run after we navigate there. So I'm just going to leave that as nil. So this error is basically saying that when we instantiate initial view controller here, that returns an optional. Let's take a look here. Yeah, see that question mark right here? So it basically means that an optional is returned. Because like I said before, you can have a storyboard without an initial view controller on it. So when you call it in code and instantiate initial view controller, it doesn't guarantee that there is one, but we're certain that there is one. So I'm just going to put an exclamation point here and say we will definitely have an initial view controller because we just saw for ourselves that it exists. All right, now there's one more thing I want to change here. And it's this text right here. I want to minimize, hard-coded text that I have in my code, especially when I'm referring to an object, because, human error, right? I can mess it up. And there is a way to do that. So what I prefer to do instead of using like a hard-coded text like that, there's a function where I can actually just get the string representation of the object itself. Okay, so there's my activities view controller. That's the object itself. Now, what I want to do is I want the string representation of that view controller, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in string and describing. Okay, I'm not done yet. What I also need is .self. So what this will do is this will just get the string representation of the object's name. Then that way I know, like, if this turns green, like, you know, if it doesn't exist, it's going to give me an error and I won't even be able to build it. So I try to build it and it gives me an error. So I just fix the name and then I know it'll build at this point. Okay, so let's test this and make sure it works. Okay, I click on trip to Bali and it goes to our trip activities. Now the back button doesn't work. There's no way for me to get back right now because I haven't coded it. So we saw that we can use the present function, the view controller's present function, to navigate forward. So let's look at how we can navigate back. And by the way, I'm kind of like a minimalist. What we can do is we can just delete the self, because the self really just represents the UI view controller, which we're in. So let's look at this code. And I do have an IB action outlet set up for the back button right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call dismiss. There we go. We're going to animate it. Is there any code I want to call after it is completed? No, there isn't. So I'm just going to put nil in there. Okay, now let's see if we can go back. Okay, we navigate forward and we're in the trip activities. I click back and we go back. So it's pretty cool. Okay, so let's summarize the view controller's present and dismiss functionality. When we wanted to navigate to another view controller, we created the didSelectRow@. function. And inside there, we called the view controller's present function. We first had to get the storyboard, and then from the storyboard, we get the view controller, and then we presented that. Now, to get back, all we had to do was we created an action outlet for the back button, and we called the dismiss function. So it's pretty easy, present and dismiss. Okay, so you learned how to use the segue, and you learned about the view controller's present and dismiss function. Now we're going to learn how to navigate with the navigation controller. So first, we're going to set up a navigation controller, and I'll show you how to navigate with that using the storyboard. And then I'm going to show you how to navigate with the navigation controller in code, because you might not be using storyboards, right? So I'm going to show you how to use what's called the push and the pop function. Okay, so again, we're going to undo all the work that we did with presenting and dismissing view controllers, and we're going to implement the navigation controller. All right, and do you guys remember how I undid all that work I did before? Yeah, you just go to source control and discard all the changes. Okay, now to use the navigation controller, what we need to do first is we need to establish a root, the root window. That's going to be the starting point of everything. So we're going to use this trips view controller. This is going to be the root. Now there's a couple things that I could do. I could bring up the object window and say I want to use a navigation controller. So I could grab this and drag it on there. And you see when I drag it on, I'm glad I'm recording this because I want to show you guys this. This is a very interesting bug that we see here where it turns upside down. And apparently it doesn't do that on everyone's computer. So I did submit a bug, and I know a guy that works at Apple on the Xcode team. And I sent him this, and he found this really interesting. He thought it was funny. I think it's funny too. It doesn't hurt anything. I can drag it on and it flips it back over the right way. But anyway, I want to show you that you can drag it from the object library on there, but that's not what we're going to do. Instead, there's an easier way where you can take an existing view controller and embed it into a navigation controller. So I'm just going to Command Z to undo that. So let's select this view controller, and I can come down here. This is new in Xcode 10, and it has the embed functions all together. So I want to embed it in a navigation controller. If you don't want to do it this way, you can also come out to the editor, and we can embed it from here, embed a navigation controller. All right, so what did this do? So it's added a navigation controller, and it made the navigation controller, it gave it this arrow here. So it made it the initial view controller. So when the app runs and it comes to this storyboard, it's going to use this navigation controller instead. And it also added a nav bar to the top of this view controller. All right, but how does that help us out? How are we going to use this to navigate to the activities view controller? Well, we're still going to use a segue. So this is the storyboard way to do this. Basically, we're going to do the same thing we did before with segues. We're going to create a storyboard reference. And we want to set that to the activities view controller. And then we're going to come to the cell and right-click that. And we're going to show. All right, great. So we have that set up. So let's run it now and see what that looks like. Okay, you notice there's a space at the top here. We click on the Bali trip and we see our new view controller. All right, that looks great. Well, it doesn't look great because this is hiding underneath the navigation controller. I can show you how to fix that, but it shouldn't really matter because I'm going to be deleting all this anyway. And then when you click back, and that's how you get back. So we didn't have to code anything to go back, right? Okay, now say you're not using storyboards or you have another view controller that you had to create dynamically from different data that you get. How can we code this so we can navigate forward and navigate back? Okay, so let's delete this. And we're going to do the same thing we did before. We need some code to tell us when the user tapped on the cell. So we're going to go back into our view controller. We'll go back into our view controller code here, the TableView code. And we're going to add that same function that we had before, the did select row at. And it's the first one there. Okay, good. And we have to do the same thing again. Okay, so we need a reference to the storyboard. And then we need to use the storyboard to instantiate that initial view controller. So let's do that first. All right, great. Now we have a reference to our view controller. It's instantiated, it's in memory, and now we can navigate to it. So before, when we wanted to navigate using the view controller, we would just call present. But with the navigation controller, it's a little bit different. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start typing in navigation controller. And where's this object coming from? How can I even type in navigation controller? How come I didn't have to instantiate or create one first? Well, that's because the navigation controller actually exists on every single view controller. This property exists on every single view controller. But as you can see here with that question mark, it doesn't always have a value. So if that view controller is not in a navigation controller, it's going to be null or nil. And because we are using one, it's not going to be nil in this case. So I have a navigation controller. And then from here, I want to call push. It's a little bit different. Instead of present, we're pushing a view controller on top of a deck of cards on top of a stack. So which one do we want to show? We want to show VC animated, sure. And it's telling me that, oh yeah, remember what we did last time? We had to add that exclamation point. All right, good. So let's try that, see how that goes. All right, so we click on Mexico, and then to get back, so of course I can click this back button, right? But what if I'm not even showing this nav bar up here? You know, maybe I don't want to show it. And when I click back, I want to navigate backwards. So how do I programmatically go backwards? Well, let's check it out. We'll go into the activities view controller here, and we have our back button. So from here, as you can probably figure out by now, we're going to use that navigation controller again, right? So again, this is a property. It exists on the view controller. It's always there. It's just whether it has a value or not depends on whether you're using the navigation controller or not. So in our case, it does have a value, and we're going to pop. So what this is it's like the dismiss function, except it has a different name called pop. And you think of it like like a deck of cards. You know, your view controllers form a deck of cards, and you're popping something off the top of it. And we'll say true. And let's run that. Oops. Let's run that and see how it looks. All right, navigate forward. We click back, and then it works. Okay, so that's working great. And I really want to reinforce this concept of what's called the navigation stack concept here. And like I said, it's like a deck of cards. Because once you get down this concept, you can think more easily and be able to debug problems that you might have with navigation in the future. So the first view controller, like I said before, is called the root view controller. And this is the bottom of the deck. Other view controllers are pushed on top of the deck. So the red one there was pushed on top. And then if you want to navigate backwards, you pop the red one back off. And that's basically the navigation stack and how it works. You start or you establish your root view controller and you're just pushing view controllers on and you're popping them back off when you want to navigate backwards. All right, good. So let's summarize this navigation controller's ability to move forward and backwards. So when we wanted to navigate to somewhere, we embedded a view controller in a navigation controller, and that's what we made our root view controller. And then using the storyboard method, what we did is we just created a reference to where we wanted to go, and then we connected it using a segue. And the segue showed the nav bar on top of the view controllers. And that gave us a way, now that we had the nav bar on top of the view controller, that gave us a way to go backwards. We didn't have to code anything. So if we wanted to do it with code, we had to use push and pop. So in order to navigate forward, we had to use push view controller. And in order to come back, we use pop view controller. And that's using that concept of like a deck of cards. You push things on top and you pop things off the top when you want to go backwards. Okay, so that was the third method of navigation. And as you can see, we have some unfinished work here with these nav bars on top. And am I just going to leave the app looking like this? No, I'm not. My next step is to create some ideas, create some designs, and then I'm going to present them on patreon.com/Big Mountain Studio. That's my Patreon website. And then my patrons are the ones who are going to decide which designs they like better. So they're helping me out with the design direction of this app as I'm building it. If you've been enjoying this series and you also want to contribute feedback and help decide the direction of this app, then feel free to go to patreon.com using that link there below, and you can sign up and also take advantage of the other membership benefits. Okay, so in this video, you learned 3 different ways to navigate. First, we covered segues, and they're good for storyboards, and they're easy to navigate forward to something, but it takes a little bit more work to navigate back. You have to create that unwind action outlet. And then we talked about the view controllers present and dismiss, and these functions are built into your view controllers. They're already there, so you can take advantage of them whenever you need to programmatically move forward or backwards. Then we talked about the navigation controller. We showed how to establish the root view controller in a navigation controller, and then we use segues to go forward and backwards, to connect to your view controllers. But I also showed you how to do it programmatically too. So if you wanted to push a view controller on top of that navigation stack or pop one off, you know how to do that now. Just remember the words push and pop. All right, thanks guys. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, consider sharing it on social media, and also subscribe because I will be continuing on with this series until this app is finished. So you'll get notified, click on that bell icon, and you'll get notified when the next videos come out. If you want to help out my channel, you can provide a translation for the title and the description of this video. Translate just the title and description to your native language so people in your country can also find this video and we can help them out too. All right, thanks guys.